Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much indeed for joining this regular Greater Manchester COVID media briefing, joined today by Sir Richard Leese, who leads on health for us across Greater Manchester, health and care, also by Deputy Mayor Baroness Beverly Hughes. I will turn first to Richard to give us an update on health across the city region. Richard.
Thanks, Andy. Good afternoon, everybody. Start off, we know there's a big match in Manchester tonight between United and City, and I've made my allegiances very plain for a very long period of time. But what I want to say is nothing about the match itself. Yesterday we had the sad loss of a City legend in Colin Bell. I want to offer our condolences to his family, and 6 days ago a United legend, Tommy Docherty, not obviously not as a player, was also lost to us. So I think condolences to families and fans on both sides of Manchester today. Before I go through the normal set of slides, I think a preamble really is that all of us look at this data on a regular basis. It always needs interpreting, and even within the Greater Manchester family there is a range of interpretation from the more pessimistic amongst us to the more optimistic, and I think it's fair to say that I probably veer towards the optimistic end when normally, and over the past few weeks leading up to Christmas was, I think, very positive about how the system was coping. Well, I have to say for you today, at the optimistic end of the scale is that if our hospital system does not fall over in the next couple of weeks, then we will have done well. I cannot understate the amount of pressure that the system is now under. And what do I mean by the system falling over? It's not simply that operations and other things get cancelled. It's when you start to get those things that journalists quite often love that are disastrous to the people involved. It's when the people are stuck in ambulances, when people are stuck on trolleys, and there is a real risk of that happening over the next few weeks. I'm going to go through the slides, and I'm going to go through them reasonably quickly, and then I'm going to give you some more up-to-date data, because if you look at the first slide, it talks about the week ending on the 1st of January 2021, and I can tell you that in the 5 days since then, the world has changed quite dramatically, really. But even if you look at those figures, if you look at what's happening to the rate of positive cases per 100,000 population, then you'll see that there has been a very significant increase over the last 7 days in particular, but over the 3 weeks that are in there. And if we were to look at the regional data, 3 weeks ago, the rate of increase in terms of prevalence was 30% a week. 2 weeks ago, it was 50%. It's now 70%, the rate of increase in prevalence. It really is taken off in a way that's unprecedented. If we move to the next slide, please. We'll move very quickly on from this one. This is really showing, and again, this is out of date, about the prevalence of the new variant. As far as we know at the moment, in Greater Manchester, approximately 30% of cases are new variant, but that proportion does appear to be growing. If we can move on. This shows the age profile, and it doesn't show a lot this time, because really, as I've said, that if we were to add a few days to that, then you'll see the dark growing very, very rapidly, particularly amongst working age population. But we know it starts with younger people and then works its way through the ages, and we are seeing an increase now amongst older people as well. So if we can move on. This is the Pillar 2 testing per 100,000 population. I think the big thing to say about this is that we're seeing across the board an increase in positivity in terms of testing. More people are testing positive. Simple as that. Move on. Care homes actually are doing remarkably well. This is probably a little bit of light in the gloom, really, is that you can see that the number of residents testing positive, showing symptoms is down again. And this has now been stable for a very, very long time. And I think with the measures that have been taken in care homes, we might be able to, I think we've got a very good chance indeed of being able to maintain that through what is going to be a very difficult period. Move on. Okay. I want to come back to this one if we can. I don't know what's after this now, but we'll come back to that one. That's a region comparison. Move on. And this is the vaccines. So if you can go back to the hospital side, and we'll come back to the vaccine one as well. This shows weekly admissions to hospitals for COVID 1919, 2112. You notice the numbers there have gone down over a 3-week period of time to 77. Number of ICU beds occupied was also going down as well. And this is where there has been a phenomenal change. And on Monday of this week, the number of people admitted with to G&A wards with COVID was 80. Right, yesterday it was up one day up to 100. The expectation is it will be back up to that 120 mark by the beginning of next week. A very, very rapid increase in admissions, and similarly on ICU. In terms of the number of people being admitted on a daily basis to ICU, if we compare it with the pre-Christmas number and today's number, it has effectively doubled. Before, around about New Year, we had of COVID ICU beds, there were 19 free beds. I have to caveat that a little bit. We have been providing mutual aid support both to Lancashire and South Cumbria and to the North Midlands, to Stoke. So we've been taking a small number of patients from other areas, but there were only there were 19. Sorry. It's 40 to 50 pre-Christmas. Let me get my numbers right. It is now 19. It has diminished very, very rapidly. That's operating with 250 ICU beds for COVID patients. The standard number of ICU beds for Greater Manchester is 227. So there are already 23 surge beds in that number. All of the surge beds are being stood back up. And the number of ICU beds for COVID patients by Monday of next week will be back up to the 298 figure that we had in March, April of last week. There are implications for that. In order to staff those beds, it does mean taking staff, particularly anaesthetic staff, off other activities, particularly operations. And there is now a real risk to cancer cardiovascular operations with a degree of urgency, the ones that are due to be, that should be carried out within a month. Diagnostics believe that will be able to be maintained, and we certainly haven't lost any of those urgent operations yet, but they are most definitely under threat at the moment, at least in being able to maintain the numbers. And again, in the run up to Christmas, we were doing record numbers of cancer operations, really catching up with backlogs. There is also an added problem, as well as having to redeploy staff for those ICU beds, that staff absence has also increased as well. Before Christmas, it was relatively high then at about 8%. It is now probably over the 10% mark. So sickness is also having its mark on health staff as well. Things we can do about that. Well, some things we've already talked about, which is about being able to increase the capacity in ICU. but as I've already stated, there are implications for that. We do need to be able to discharge more patients from hospital. At the moment, our missions are far exceeding discharges, and we do have patients in hospital that could be discharged. We could make more use of the Nightingale. There are 36 beds available there at the moment, of which 25 are occupied. We'll be able to stand up 36 beds very, very quickly to increase the capacity there. And of course, that it doesn't mean being discharged from hospitals. It's being relocated to a place where there isn't the same intensity. Although, again, with Nightingale, although the beds might be there, that the staffing does become an issue. And we really need to get more support in discharging people back to home or into care. There are places in care homes and there are care homes that will accept people into those places. There's a lack of confidence from older people in particular, who feel safe in hospital, that they don't want to be discharged. We will have to work with families in order to be able to improve the position. The other things we can do about it are clearly about how do we reduce the number of patients in the first. A quick fix, and the numbers I've just given you don't take account of New Year yet. It'll be another week before we see the impact of New Year, and that leads into probably the biggest single thing we can do, which is around changing behaviour. So I'll talk about vaccines and testing in a while, but vaccination doesn't stop people transmitting. It doesn't stop people contracting the virus. What it does is to reduce the symptoms, which will reduce the pressure on hospitals. The biggest single thing to reduce transmission is people's behaviour. When Bev talks a little while about policing, be able to talk about on New Year's Eve, GNP had to attend over 1,000 house parties, over 1,000 house parties. This is people being stupid and selfish in their behaviour, and they are putting lives at risk. By and large, not their own lives. Just tell you who in Greater Manchester dies from COVID-19. And this is taking account of all the deaths to date, going right back to March. Around about 51 to 52% of deaths are people who are over the age of 80. Just over 40% of the deaths are people between 60 and 80. Between 40 and 60, it's down to about 7.5%. Less than 1% are people under the age of 40. And those figures are quite stark. So a lot of the people who are partying, not putting themselves at risk, but they are putting at risk older relatives, older friends, older people, more vulnerable people within our communities. We really have to get over that very clear message that there isn't a magic bullet for COVID-19. The biggest single thing that will reduce the level of risk to people is the way that we behave. And having parties of that sort, as I said earlier, it is selfish, it is stupid, it is putting lives at risk. Can't stress that enough. Can we turn to the vaccine chart? There we go. Okay. Just a word about vaccines. Vaccination, I'd say it's not a magic bullet, but it is really, really important, because this is how we do take pressure off hospitals. And if we can take pressure off hospitals, then that does allow us to start getting back to normal. So it's not a cure, but it will make a real difference. Prime Minister earlier in the week promised that all of those people in the top 4 categories on that chart will be vaccinated by, or have their first vaccination by the middle of February. You'll see that approximately so far we've vaccinated about 43,000 people. In those top 4 categories in Greater Manchester, there are 556,000 people. In order to meet that target, we have to vaccinate 90,000 people a week. So just look at those numbers. I think, again, the Prime Minister said we will achieve that target with a fair wind. I'd have to say we need a bit of a gale in order to be able to achieve that target. But let's hope that we do. And we are certainly gearing up to be able to do that. By next week, we'll have 78 different vaccination sites available, including one mass vaccination site, the rest spread around Greater Manchester. We've recruited an army of volunteers to support the vaccination programme. And if we get the vaccines, that we are geared up to do that. But we should not underestimate the scale of the task in achieving that. But there is an added problem here, that if we get the vaccines, and all the vaccines we are getting are being used, they're being used appropriately with people in the right priority areas. But if we get all of the dosages we need, as things stand at the moment, we will not know whether we have vaccinated all the right people or not. Many of you remember the arguments we had last year about testing data and the fact that we didn't have the personalised data tested. We are, believe it or not, in exactly the same with vaccines. Our CCGs, our clinical care groups, and our directors of public not have the. So to understand it, Downing Street has recognised that there is an issue there. It is really, I think, quite frightening. Having gone through that issue once around testing, we are now going through it again around vaccination. And I think there might be a general point there about having gone down into this new lockdown, is that the extent to which that all the preparations weren't in place. So on Monday night, it's announced that schools were going to be closed. We still do not have a system in place for provision of free school meals. Now, the Prime Minister said that something will be put in place today, but we went through exactly the same thing during lockdown in April and May of last year. It took weeks to get the national voucher system up and running. It would be absolutely shameful if we were in exactly the position of the same happening again. The fact that guidance wasn't ready on Monday night when the announcement was made, even though most of us have been predicting a national lockdown for weeks in the aftermath of Christmas. It might have come a week or two earlier than we expected, but we cannot say that this was not right. I think it's, for me, perhaps a very different message to certainly, Andy, what I've been delivering previously. But what I really want to try and get over is the absolute seriousness of the position we are in at the moment. I know others, including the Secretary of State for Health, have talked about our hospitals falling over previously. It was part of the argument for putting us into Tier 3 months ago. I don't believe we were at risk of falling over then, and said so at the time. I now do believe that we are at serious risk of the system falling over, and that really does mean that we have to do everything possible to make sure that doesn't happen.
Thanks very much indeed, Richard. A very serious and sobering message there, reflecting a changed position in Greater Manchester in the early days of the new year. And as you say, very much a change that we've seen coming through that new year period, and critical that we respond accordingly. And we will. You touched on New Year, Richard, so I'll hand over to Bev now to take us through the enforcement issues and the latest position with GMP. So Bev, over to you. Bev, I don't know if you're on mute.
Keep slipping back. Thank you, Andy. Yes, and good afternoon, everybody. As Richard's already alluded to in his very salutary message, the situation is very serious here, and I think because of a very huge increase in COVID-related incidents over the past week, including New Year, and the fact that we know that there is a high incidence of the new variant of COVID in Greater Manchester, which we understand is so much more easily transmitted between people, then because of that activity over the past week in COVID-related social gatherings particularly, we can expect to see the situation that Sir Richard has described only get worse as a result of a rise in infections from the behaviour of people over the last week. So over that period, 1,500 reports into Greater Manchester to come to COVID-related incidents that the members of the public were concerned about, attending over 1,000 house parties, including, and I've alluded to this at previous conferences, now the trend to book Airbnb and short-term city centre lets specifically for the purpose of house parties, and a large number of those. It was possible to prevent actually an unlicensed music event in Wigan, but actually in every part of Greater Manchester, particularly on New Year's Eve, when 105 fixed penalty notices were issued on that evening alone, 185 over the past 7 days. We saw activities of all kinds, social activities of all kinds in every part of Greater Manchester, mainly house parties and social gatherings, 1 or 2 businesses that were trading illegally, a pub in Stockport which had a £1,000 fine. Also incidents at the Trafford Centre that the police had to attend to. A protest last Saturday with about 30 to 40 people, which the police were able to use the new situation on protests, which is illegal now under Tier 4 and under lockdown, to gather for a protest at the moment. So the police were able to disperse that. I mean, this level of activity was despite a very intense and sustained media campaign, both from the police, with officers on radio, on social media, and from local authorities and our health services, asking people not to gather. Nonetheless, we saw this very, very high level of social activity with large numbers of people getting together over this period. So, you know, I really have to echo what Sir Richard has said. We have to try and get this message across that given the situation here, everything else we can possibly do in terms of the restrictions on people is being applied, but unless people observe those restrictions and comply with what's required and don't gather, then we will see this inexorable rise in infections. And as he said, and I completely agree with him, largely the people who aren't complying in this way aren't the people who are putting their own lives at risk. It's the lives of their older relatives, in particular, older members of the community. As we go into the new lockdown arrangements, then police activity will continue. Over the last period, there are a large number of visits, about 600 visits almost, to businesses to check. Most of them were compliant. As I say, the issue is house parties and large social gatherings. Police and the local authorities together will continue the joint operations, including in student areas, because although many students have gone home in Manchester, many have not. And there is a specific operation jointly with Manchester City Council around keeping students safe. All of those will continue, and all of the extra deployment that we have around those operations will be available. I say that with some concern, because over the last week, as a result directly of the rise in incidence of COVID infections, then the overall sickness absence rate in Greater Manchester Police for officers and staff together has increased just over 1 week from 2.4% to 4%. And obviously that raises a concern that some aspects of policing operations will be affected if this rise in infections continues to affect them, and indeed other public services, including the health service. So it's something we should be aware of. It isn't just the general population, it's the people on whom we depend for vital public services who are also going to be affected if they catch COVID or if they have to self-isolate because they've been in contact with somebody else who's become ill. So generally the activity will continue in the way that I've described. I just wanted to give you a quick update on two specific issues. One is the crime support line that was stood up just before Christmas for those people who'd heard about the HMIC FRS report and were concerned that their complaint to Greater Manchester Police was one of those that had not been treated properly. We've had so far 57 callers into that support line. 12 formal complaints have gone so far into Greater Manchester Police. Another dozen or so people have wanted support from victim support. And of the other callers, they've made certain complaints and dissatisfactions about the fact that they feel their complaint was not recorded as a crime. All of those are being followed up to see if people want to follow through with a formal complaint. And the work to implement the recommendations of that report are continuing now very rapidly and very robustly. And then just finally, I wanted to draw to your attention details on a press release that actually we're putting out immediately after this press conference, and it's in relation to domestic violence. You will remember, I'm sure, the concern that we all had during the last lockdown as to whether people at risk or experiencing domestic violence in the home were actually able to get the support that they needed, and it was not clear. But obviously there was a lot of concern because the usual avenues by which people could express their concerns and get help, so GPs, schools, access to friends and families, was curtailed by the lockdown. So a great deal of effort was made to explain to people that, you know, the police are still there to respond and services are there to respond. There's also a concern because the charities that we work with, particularly the specialist charities providing support to domestic abuse victims, were not getting the income and the donations they normally get. So the government did make some money available last year that we distributed to those organisations to help them ramp up their capacity, particularly in terms of online access to their services. And another almost 600,000 has been made available by the government to the Combined Authority last month. And we have again distributed that on the basis of bids from organisations to 26 voluntary sector organisations in Greater Manchester to help them to adapt their services, to improve the digital capabilities and the potential for online counselling. But going beyond that, we really want to send the message out to people that, you know, we are in lockdown, but one of the important exemptions that people understand is that if you are a victim of domestic violence or you're fearful of that, then that does not apply to you. You can leave your home to get help for that. But obviously you can also still call the police and get access to online support through victim support or any one of these specialist organisations that are there to help support victims. So, you know, our message to victims of domestic abuse is that whilst the restrictions require people to stay at home, if home isn't a safe place for you, you know, you must seek help, and that help continues even during this period. As I say, we'll be putting out a press release after this conference giving details of various phone numbers and ways of accessing online support that people can avail themselves of if they're in that situation, and it is really important. Thank you very much, Andy.
Thank you to you, Bev. A lot of important stuff that we've got to get through today, colleagues, and grateful for your patience in bearing with us. It might mean we run slightly over the 2 o'clock deadline, but don't worry, we will get through your questions. I just want to update on 3 further issues before we turn to your questions. Obviously, with entering a new national lockdown, thoughts have turned again to people homeless in the city region, those sleeping rough. You might remember before Christmas, I updated you on our plans with regard to a bed every night, the Greater Manchester funded scheme to support people with somewhere to go. We had 480 places, I should say, operational running into Christmas, but we took a decision to expand that using mayoral funding just before the Christmas period to sustain 520 places over the Christmas and New Year period, which we did, and we'll be holding it at that. And we are endeavouring to make an offer available to everybody. It's important for me to say this is difficult because, as I say, there are 520 people in a bed every night, a further 450 in what we would have called everyone in, the accommodation we found in the spring of last year. And I'm sure Richard would confirm there are still, on top of that, thousands of individuals and families in temporary accommodation. So it's a challenging picture, but we are managing it and trying to provide an offer for everybody. But there is an immediate issue in front of us that I needed to bring to your attention this afternoon, and in particular to a letter that the City Mayor of Salford, Paul Dennett, who leads on housing and homelessness for us, will be writing tomorrow to the Communities Secretary. And it's an urgent appeal on the government to extend the ban on evictions, which is due to expire on Monday the 11th of January. If we were to see more people coming out onto the streets of Greater Manchester, it would make what is a very difficult situation potentially unsustainable, and we would see much greater increase in homelessness and rough sleeping during the national lockdown, which I hope is not what anybody wants to see. And I appreciate the way the Secretary of State has prioritised these issues through the pandemic, but we need to continue to do so. So the appeal will be going tomorrow to the Secretary of State from Greater Manchester, from Paul Dennett, on behalf of everybody in Greater Manchester, asking for the government to extend the ban on evictions. We would say beyond March, so that we can take this right the way through the pandemic. So that letter will be sent tomorrow, and we could provide details if anybody is interested. The second issue I wanted to touch on is an issue which is very much high in the media at the moment, which is the 3 million or so people who continue to be excluded from the support schemes that the Chancellor has set up. Those are people working freelance, some self-employed, some who are new starters and missed out on furlough, a whole range of different reasons why people have not been able to access public support. But of course, going into a new year with savings completely depleted, life is getting harder and harder and harder for these people. And we know that hundreds of thousands of them live in Greater Manchester, and we need to find solutions where we can. And I believe there is a solution for one group within the excluded, and it's really important that we try and kind of now break this issue down and find practical solutions. You may remember last year I spoke about the people who were newly self-employed, unable to access support. So this is people who probably became self-employed in the financial year 2019-20, and who until recently had not submitted a tax return. And that was the reason given by the Chancellor for their exclusion from the self-employment income support scheme, that they hadn't issued a full tax return, therefore there could be no guarantee around their earnings. Well, of course, that reason for denying support falls away as those people are now filing their first tax return. And I'll be writing to the Chancellor later this afternoon to say, to appeal to him to now open up eligibility to the self-employment support scheme for those people who were newly self-employed and have now submitted a tax return, and to backdate support for them through to the start of the self-employment income support scheme. That issue in particular can now be solved. And I think if we hear about the 3 million, it's important to break down the scale of this challenge and fix the problems where we can. And I'll be making that appeal to the government today. There is now no reason why those people cannot be helped. And it's really important, we believe, that the government responds positively to the solution that I will be putting forward to them later today. Quickly on the issue, third issue, which is children and young people's access to online learning through this period. It's encouraging to see so much being done to recognise the importance of this issue from the government, but also the BBC too. We're very proud, of course, with BBC Children's based in Salford. Lots of this educational output will be being made here and put onto BBC channels, and I think that really shows the benefit of a strong national broadcaster like the BBC stepping forward immediately, and we congratulate our BBC colleagues in Salford for the work that's being done. But there is still a major challenge here in Greater Manchester to get all young people online in this lockdown period. So if we want to try and break that issue down, we estimate that about 1 in 5 of our learners do not have digital access on a regular basis. So if you want to put that in numerical terms, that's 100,000 young people in Greater Manchester. And of course, they are now potentially slipping backwards in this period, and it's urgent that we plug that gap. We know that from the first initiative that the government held earlier this year, that probably a little less than half of those people received some support, and we established a GM Tech Fund that also got devices to young people. Around 500 were distributed through that route. So we did make some inroads, but we think about over half of that 100,000 still need to be helped. What we're hearing nationally means that there is some further support coming, but we anticipate that there still will be a gap in Greater Manchester of between 15 and 20,000 young people who do not have either a device or data to give them the digital access that they will need through the period that schools aren't fully open. So what we are doing is working again through the GM Tech Fund and putting an appeal out, which already has been responded to positively by so many businesses in Greater Manchester, but we really want to encourage them to come forward and help to donate devices or refurbished devices. That's the first call we're making on our businesses. Secondly, if they can help us with connectivity issues, so to donate SIM cards or portable hotspots or dongles, any device that can give young people access to the data that they need, and thirdly, to make a financial contribution to the GM Tech Fund. So it's an appeal that we wanted to put out today through you to get all of our young people online, and I think it's becoming a call that's supported by all of the political parties at a national level. This is doable and achievable, and we should get on and make sure that it happens. So I'm going to leave it there, other than just to echo what Richard said at the very start. Obviously, Greater Manchester is gathering virtually this evening for the big match, and it's really important in advance of it that we, as the leaders of Greater Manchester, pay tribute to 2 legends that we have lost in recent days. As Richard said a week or so ago, Tommy Docherty, FA Cup winning manager for Manchester United in 1977, and the King, Colin Bell, who obviously we heard the sad news about yesterday, and we'd want to send our condolences to Colin's family, to Tommy's family, to all supporters of Manchester United and Manchester City, and we're certain that both of those giants of our game will be properly commemorated this evening. Ross, I'll now hand back to you, and thank you, colleagues, for your patience in allowing us to give you those updates.
Thanks very much, Andy. The first question I'm going to take is from Jen Williams at the MEN. However, I think you've answered most of her questions, so the question's not at the top of the list, it's actually down at the very bottom, and I'll put it to Richard in the first instance, and then back to you, Andy. Could I just update it to ask how likely you think it is that urgent operations will have to be cancelled, and when do you think we might hit that point? And Richard, that one's to you first.
I think there is, I think I said earlier, there is a very high risk at the moment. It really does depend on the number of COVID patients that are going into ICU, how long they stay there. Again, a recovery rate is still far better than it was back in April and May, which is clearly a positive within this. The planning is taking place to how that can be managed as far as possible to try and keep as many of those urgent operations going. But ultimately, if as happened in April and May, the numbers in ICU continue to go up, then it's simply there is not the staff available to keep the urgent operations going. I'm sorry, Jenny, if that seems lacking in precision, but that's because we can't be precise about it. The one thing I would say, though, is that compared to any point in this crisis, we have never seen a rate of change like we are seeing at the moment. We've never seen a rate of increase like this. And that does put me in the position. If we'd had this press conference yesterday, I would have been saying different things. If we have it tomorrow, I might be saying different things simply because of that rate of change.
Thanks, Richard. Just one other thing. I think your line cut out slightly when you were talking about the vaccine data, and BBC News have asked if you could please repeat the issue you are having with data being given from government around the vaccines.
Well, if you remember back last year, we had an ongoing argument about testing data, getting personalised information about who was being tested. We have exactly the same issue now with vaccines. So although we know people are being vaccinated, whilst we're fairly confident it is the right people who are being vaccinated, i.e. people who fit into those priority groups, we don't know who they are. So in terms of meeting that target of getting the top 4 groups all covered by the middle of February, apart from it's very ambitious to get that number of vaccinations done full stop, although obviously we will try our utmost to do that, we will not know whether we've succeeded or not, because we simply don't have that data. Directors of public health don't have the data. If we see that there are particular pockets of resistance or particular areas where the vaccinations are not taking place, we won't know that. We won't be able to intervene because we don't have that data. It's really essential for meeting that target that the professionals on the ground do have the data in order to be able to make sure that we maximise the success of the vaccination programme.
Thanks, Richard. And just one more while we'll go to you from Hannah Miller, who's also asking about vaccinations. Her question just at the bottom of the chain. She's asking if she can ask a bit more about the data sharing issue to help with understanding. NHS England say that all vaccinations are being recorded and fed back into GP records daily. So GPs absolutely have access to data around which of their patients have been vaccinated as they would with any vaccination, and that's all a quote. Is your concern that there is no overarching picture of vaccination, and what impact will this have on the rollout?
That's exactly right. It's as I said that GPs will know on a very localised basis. They will know from their own patient list. In terms of vaccines are being carried out in hospitals, they're being carried out in through primary care networks, through mass vaccination centres, and a lot of locations. What we won't know is whether we are touching all the bases that require to be touched to get everybody vaccinated. And the people who really need to know this are those people who are involved in the coordination at a local level. So it's directors of public health and clinical care commissioning groups. I don't need that information. Hannah doesn't need that information, but those people do.
Thanks very much. Andy, did you want to come in on any of that? Fab. I'm going to go to a question from Kevin Fitzpatrick. I think we've covered the vaccine issue. So Andy, what can you tell us about conversations with government about the postponement of May's elections? And do you personally think that they can go ahead safely in May? So Andy, that one's to you.
Thanks, Kevin. I just would want to stress that no proposal has been put to Greater Manchester. We and others will continue to engage with the government on this, but ultimately it's a decision for the government. So I think some of the reports have got a little ahead of things here. It is a matter for ministers. I think they want to go ahead in May, but obviously there's consideration of that going on at the moment. Can they go ahead safely? Well, I would recommend postal votes. I think if greater use of postal votes was to be made, then of course I think that would increase the safety of elections. But there is the question of campaigning, which also has to be considered alongside that. So it's a matter for ministers. I think they're going about this properly. No decision made, and as we understand it, we're still working on the basis that they'll be taking place in May, and we wait to hear if that will change.
Thanks, Andy. I'm going to go to Emma Gill from the MEN, who's asking, Gavin Williamson, the Education Secretary, has said that schools are much better prepared than last March to implement home learning, but that there are children without the devices or the internet to do so. Also, despite it now being a legal requirement for schools to offer high quality remote learning, parents have told us what's been offered in some cases falls well short of the expected standard. We're facing a situation where some schools have dished out iPads to every pupil, and some are simply asking for parents to print out worksheets when they don't even have the printers to do so. What can be done to help families and to ensure that schools are what schools are offering is adequate? I know you touched on this earlier, but just if you did anything you wanted to add on Emma's question.
Well, thanks, Emma. You're right to ask the question. I mean, it is about the devices, it is about the data, but as you say, it's more than that as well, isn't it? And to pick up what Richard was saying before, frustrating that schools have been in some ways put through the chaos of reopening when actually they should have perhaps been focusing on online learning, and that has probably created an extra headache for them. But we just got to sort of focus now on this challenge, and it's a solvable challenge as far as I'm concerned. I'm glad that the government is recognising the importance of it nationally, but we're working on the basis that all of our needs would not necessarily be met through those national schemes. That's why we're making the appeal to business to support us, and they have done. The GM Tech Fund was a great success earlier this year. We just need to scale it up. We've already had conversations with some of the big tech players in Greater Manchester who talked about whether or not there can be efforts to make subsidised data packages available to young people who don't have access at home. So lots going on, and I think the best I can say, Emma, is that we will come back to you next week with a full update of where we've got to. But you know, there's a lot of focus on this right now.
Thanks. A question from Jessica Hill.
Just comment on that. And it's not just an issue of equipment. There are a lot of young people who are as happy, in fact, will prefer to use their mobile phone rather than use an iPad or a laptop. It really is the data issue is the biggest single issue. The easiest solution is that schools ought to be funded to be able to ensure that the schools are able to provide the equipment, the dongles, and that's the guarantee that every child is able to get what they need. National systems for this are slow, they're clumsy, they've not worked previously. It's the school's responsibility to provide the education. Let's give the schools a resource, because if we give the schools a resource, it will get managed, it will get out.
Thanks, Richard. Question from, actually, Richard, while we're there, a question from James Much at the Bolton News. It's thought that 1 in 50 people in the UK have COVID and 1 in 30 in London have it. Is the rate in GM known at the moment, and is it known how much the rate has increased in the last couple of weeks?
We can only do this on the basis of the positivity tests, really. So no, we don't know how people in Greater Manchester have got it, and frankly, we don't know how many people in the UK. We don't know how many people in London. Either all of these are estimates. What we do know is prevalence rate at the moment is going up by about 70% per week, but that rate is accelerating. That's not a fixed rate. So 2 weeks ago it's 30%, a week ago it's 50%, now it's 70%. So the prevalence rate really is taking off in a way we've never seen before.
Thanks, Richard. Question for Andy from Jessica Hill at the Local Government Chronicle. The government has confirmed it will not be restarting the Everyone In scheme that helped house rough sleepers during the first lockdown. Do you agree with that decision? Obviously, again, it's a topic you spoke on before, but on that specific issue.
It's difficult because as I said before, we're sustaining our position through voluntary efforts in Greater Manchester. And I think that whether they call it everyone in or just provide support to us to make sure that we can sustain the level of provision that we've got, that's what they should be doing. So, I can understand if they didn't want to precisely rerun the everyone in scheme, because it's not needed in that way right now because of the other provision that we've got in place, but they should be providing support to us to maintain the number of COVID secure places that we've got, and also taking action on issues like evictions, which I mentioned. No recourse to public funds is an ongoing challenge for us, where we have to support people through charitable means. So I think we need to see the same level of focus from the government on this issue, and the principle of everyone in should be repeated, which is that we are able to make an offer for everybody, and that's what we are endeavouring to do in Greater Manchester. But we could do with more help from the government, both financial and support around issues like evictions, to enable to manage this third national lockdown.
Thanks. Did anybody else want to come in on that one? No. Question from Tom Dambach at Hits Radio. Charities are raising concern about getting a COVID vaccine to rough sleepers because they have no fixed address. Is there a plan in GM to make sure it reaches them, given that they are some of the most vulnerable people in society? Andy, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, Richard may know a little more about the plan, although I probably have to say, Tom, that it is not going to be the immediate focus right now, because if you look at the priority groups for vaccine, I think you would probably conclude that the majority of rough sleepers would fall into stage 6 or priority group 6, which is people between the age of 16 and 58 who have long-term health conditions. Most, if not all, rough sleepers have long-term health conditions, so would qualify at that point. We have a number of expert providers in Greater Manchester, Urban Village being one, who are well used to dealing with our rough sleeping population in terms of providing healthcare. So I'm sure these issues are in hand. It's just that on the current plan, it's hard to see how we would be providing a vaccine to people because of the prioritization that's been set nationally, and the expectation would be that vaccination of people who are homeless or rough sleeping would be between the middle of February and the Easter period.
Thanks, Andy. Richard, did you want to come in on that one?
I think there's at least one local authority, Oldham, have already made announcements about prioritising homeless people, and I think in terms of rough sleepers, that all of the districts have staff and volunteer sleepers, and within the priority order that Andy's talked about, we do have the facilities and the support through that group.
Thanks, Richard. I think we
Ross,
dropped out a little bit there.
Ross, can I just say a little more? I think just to echo the point Richard was making as it was breaking up. I think we would want to look at it again from a sort of practical and pragmatic point of view, Tom. If we could obviously have some flexibility to get a vaccine to people who really need one, particularly people who are extremely vulnerable, then we would we would want to have that discussion with the government. So it's an important question. I think we will come back to you in due course with a full answer as to where we can get to with a GM plan with regard to the most vulnerable, as you say. But it's an important question. On the strict prioritisation, it would be later than mid-February, but I think we need more flexibility to be able to get to those who need it most.
Thanks. A question from Maya Wolf Robinson at The Guardian. We're hearing reports of schools in Greater Manchester who are struggling with demand for places, with some primary schools open to hundreds of children. Do you back schools limiting places to children with 2 key worker parents? What other advice do you have for schools with large numbers? Andy, do you want to take that one first? And Richard and Bev may want to come in on it.
Thanks, Maya. I mean, I think we should just back schools generally through this period. As I was saying at the weekend, you know, we should trust their judgments and back them as much as we can. I certainly have heard of schools who are trying to open their doors to as many as they feel they can safely support, because I think having strict rules about saying, well, you know, only one parent a key worker, or in some cases it might just be better for that family if those children could be accommodated in school. So I think what I would say is we need to sort of start not sort of dictating to schools what they must do, or when they must do something, but more whatever they believe is right for their students, for their community, and we then should be doing what we can to try and support them in making those decisions, dealing with the issue of free school meals, as Richard said earlier, dealing with the question of online learning. If there isn't an online learning package for people, I think we would want to support schools if they then decided to help bring more people back into the school environment. So I think it's going to be a case of working with schools, backing head teachers and teachers to come up with the right solutions for their communities, is the way I would look at it.
Thanks. Bev or Richard, would you either of you? Bev?
I'll just comment, if I may, from just a personal experience in another capacity. As somebody with 8 grandchildren in schools in Greater Manchester, and I'm also trustee of a large primary. And honestly, I think what heads and teachers and parents have been put through in the last 24 hours takes to a new level the chaos and shambles that the government have foisted on those groups. I mean, I've been having almost hourly updates from the head teacher at the school I'm involved with. She was all set to, in fact, sent letters out to parents on Sunday after the announcement, and that all had to be unscrambled. She's now trying to cope with a very large number of applications from children of parents of key workers and those of vulnerable children. It's well nigh impossible. They're doing an absolutely outstanding job. It is remarkable, but really they should not have to be faced with this level of chaos and the impact it's having on children, on parents, and on heads and teachers.
Thank you, Bev. Richard, did you want to come in on that one?
Yes, I think Bev's really covered the chaos that faced over the last few days. I think what I think we all try and do put first are the interests of the children themselves and their education, and the needs of the family. We are facing lots and lots of very angry parents at the moment because of the circumstances they're now in. Schools are in the front line of dealing with that. I think all we can do is, instead of bringing in arbitrary rules to solve a government-created problem, is support our schools in trying to make the best judgments they can in dealing with these on the immediacy basis that they're having to. And it is an awful position, but that's what we're doing, I think, across the piece, is trusting schools to make the right judgments, working with them to help them make those judgments, and doing the best they can in almost impossible circumstances.
Thanks, Richard. I'm going to move on to a question from Adam at the Jewish Telegraph, and apologies to those who've submitted second questions. I don't think we'll be able to get to them today. Andy, I'll put this to you first. Yesterday, a funeral was attended by 300 people in a more Orthodox Jewish area of Manchester. Non-essential shops are still operating with a backdoor opening policy, while a wedding was due to take place with around 100 guests today. The latter was stopped by police just 1 hour beforehand, as the Jewish Community Leadership Group isn't due to meet anytime soon and only meets once a month. If that, what is being done to police the lockdown restrictions in areas where they've constantly been ignored or broken?
Well, thanks, Adam. Bev may want to say something too. Obviously, it was for this reason that we set up a coordination group between Greater Manchester Police and the community to obviously provide a forum to deal with some of these issues. The issues you've raised, Adam, are serious, and I will commit now to working with Bev to look into these issues, because they are completely outwith what should be happening at this moment in time. That they are, outrageous breaches actually of, if they had gone ahead of the rules that are now in place, and would need to be dealt with quite severely, given the numbers that you're describing. So, I say we need to ensure that there's no breakdown of communication. We need to make sure everyone's got the right information, but obviously these are serious incidents, and if there is a breakdown of communication with the community, we need to fix that quickly. And if enforcement action is needed to be taken, then I'm sure it will be. But Bev, would you like to add anything to that?
Yes, thank you, Andy. And thanks, Adam. I didn't know about the funeral, and I'll certainly investigate that. I'm pleased that the police stopped the wedding taking place. In fact, the communication between the police and the Jewish community, and indeed other communities in Greater Manchester, doesn't depend on meetings of the Jewish Community Leadership Group. Obviously, they work closely with that group, but also other groups, and communication is continuing all the time. As it happens, I meet regularly with representatives of those groups. I'm meeting on Monday with Mark Levy of the Jewish Leadership Council and Amanda Bromstick of the Community Security Trust. Those are Jewish organisations, as you know, and they help us to get the messages across to members of the Jewish community right across the board, whether it's Orthodox or not. It is hard getting those messages across. The police will intervene if they get information in at the right time, that is, as things are taking place, or ideally before. And we just need to keep those efforts up on communication and also enforcement. But I just wanted to reassure you that, that dialogue is ongoing. These are well-established routes of communication between the police and those leaders, and I'll try and see if we can redouble our efforts to get the message out to the wider community that these activities are just not appropriate at this time.
Thanks, Bev.
Can I just
Richard?
perhaps add a little? Sorry, I mean, this is undoubtedly my end of the city, actually, where this is happening, and I think Adam might be answering his question a little bit in code. I know Mark well. He attends the Heaton Park Synagogue just around the corner from me. That some of the communities I think that Adam's talking about would not accept Mark or the Jewish Representative Council has been speaking for them. But I think the point that Bev makes is that there is regular dialogue in between with those communities is still the case. So, and that has to go on a daily basis rather than just on a once a month meeting. That's all I will add to what's already been said.
Thanks, Richard. A question from Andy Bounds. And I think this may have been announced when we've been doing this press conference, but have you identified a vaccine hub for the region such as the XL Nightingale in London? And do you have access to a proportional number of vaccine doses based on the eligible population as London and the South East? Andy, would you like to take this first, or would you like me to put it to Sir Richard?
I think to Richard. Ross, I think an announcement has been made by the government, hasn't it, while we've been,
yeah.
I don't know if Richard's got that. So.
Yeah, well, no, I have. I have to say, Andy, I was going to break the rules and announce it anyway, but it's now been officially, and we've actually known for weeks it was going to be at the Etihad Centre, but for some reason the government wanted to not announce it. It's now been announced, so Etihad will be where the regional vaccination centre is. In terms of the number of vaccine doses available based on eligible population, I really can't answer that question at the moment. I started from another point, which I think I identified earlier, which is how many doses do we need in order to meet the requirements of those target groups, and we know what those are, and we very much hope and expect that those will be delivered over the next few weeks.
Thanks. And Richard, the final question, given that I think Pat's had his question answered just there, and the others are follow-ups. It's from Joshi Herman at the Mill. So Richard, it's almost a month now since vaccinations began, and the numbers you released today show only 13% of people in the top 2 categories in Greater Manchester have had the jab so far. At that rate, it would take until the summer before we get through just those 2 categories. What is the biggest thing slowing us down? Is it supplies of the vaccine, lack of staff? And a question for Andy, which I'll come on to. Does the pace of vaccination so far concern you? Have you held any urgent meetings about speeding it up? So Richard, do you want to take that first, and then I'll pass it over to Andy.
I think there are 2 things. First of all, it is supplies of the vaccine. Don't forget, when we started the process, we only had the Pfizer vaccine, which is quite difficult to manage and store. We've now got the Oxford vaccine coming on stream, which is a lot simpler. The second is that you can't set up a vaccination program on the scale we're talking about overnight, and say that some of these 78 centres I was talking about will come on stream next week. Not all the centres are in place there. So it is partly to do with supplies. It is partly to do with the logistics. Partly Andy's question. Yes, it is frustrating. We would like it to be faster, but will be in a position from next week that if we get the doses of vaccine, that we will be able to start delivering at the sort of pace and scale we need to be delivering at.
Thanks, Andy. Over to you just for the final part of the question. Also, if you get any final thoughts before we finish up.
Yeah, thanks Ross. I think at this stage, the pace is probably what you might expect it to be, Josh, if I'm being honest. It's early days in the vaccination programme, so a start has been made. It's a reasonably good start. I think what Richard said earlier is what now needs to happen. It's that gale force wind needs to come in behind the sails that have been sort of set up in these early stages. So, it's a massive challenge, but I wouldn't want this to go the way of arguments about PPE testing. Nobody wanted those, but obviously they became bogged down in issues that just didn't get resolved. I think with vaccination, we need to kind of pull right together and get this working, quickly. That's what the population of Greater Manchester wants to see. And, you ask if we had any urgent meetings. Well, we had a long discussion at the Greater Manchester COVID Emergency Committee yesterday about the plans here. And I'm sure, speaking for Bev and Richard, and saying that we all felt confidence in the efforts that are underway to identify sites and to bring in the relevant staff. So we are holding meetings. But an additional thing I can say is that I've made contact with the Secretary of State for Health, and I've offered to him to, help bring together a workshop of mayors to see if we can iron out these issues now. The data issue Richard mentioned earlier, that just needs fixing, because we need to be giving you a slide every week at this press conference so that you can sort of challenge and hold us to account. What progress are we making? Let's have it broken down by borough as well, so that we can see the clear picture across Greater Manchester. I think if we have that level of transparency in the vaccination programme, that will in itself drive the progress that we need to see. But we can't have that at the moment because of the lack of data, as Richard was describing. But there are other issues about volunteers, training and registration requirements, obviously supply of vaccine. There's a whole range of things here that do need to be ironed out with the government. So, the offer I'm making is let's just sort those things out now, agree the way we're going to go about this, and let's get on with it. One thing that was relayed to us yesterday at the committee was something that reminded me actually of PPE, which is supplies of vaccine not arriving when we thought they were going to arrive. So in one of our boroughs, an effort was made to get people ready to take it into care homes, and then the vaccine didn't arrive, and then it arrived the next day. That was the kind of problem that bedeviled us on PPE, and it's the kind of issue we need to avoid this time round. They need to work through maybe more GM level so that we can then work with our districts and make sure the dots are joined on the ground. So it's a really important question, Joshy. We're all very focused on it. Obviously, Rich is leading on this for us, but we're all supporting whatever way we can. We want to get to a position where Greater Manchester does hit that February target, and more if we can. No, that might be too much, but at least hitting that target. And because our cases, although high and rising, are still lower than the England average, of course, that's a big incentive for us to see if we can come out of this lockdown in a stronger position as we can get. So huge amount of focus. Ross, shall I just finish in thanking everybody? It's been really grateful to Richard and to Bev for their updates today. A very, as I said before, sobering sort of update today. But a whole range of issues here that have kind of arisen because of the national lockdown that haven't yet been resolved, as Bev was saying. Go back to Maya's question from The Guardian, schools need to be supported, don't they? They cannot have all of this chaos thrown at them. They need support with both the numbers, free school meals, the online packages, and we need a resolution to the whole question of homelessness. If they aren't going to continue with everyone in, they need to give us funding to support the voluntary schemes that we're running here in Greater Manchester. Just to back away from all of those schemes in this most difficult of all national lockdowns, I think, is to step away from their responsibilities as a government, and I hope they won't be. I hope they won't be doing that. So a long session this afternoon, but I hope you found it an informative one. We've certainly appreciated the opportunity to update you on where we are with our thinking. As I say, the letter to the Chancellor on that issue of newly self-employed will be going later this afternoon. I would certainly appreciate your help in continuing to raise the plight of 3 million taxpayers, fellow citizens of this country who have been given nothing so far. I think that remains one of the biggest unresolved issues of this pandemic, and I certainly will be continuing to raise my voice in support of those people, and we will make that letter available later. So Ross, that probably ties up everything, I think, for this afternoon. Thanks to you and all of our colleagues in the media for joining, and we will see you all next week. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.